My delegation would like to associate itself with a statement which has just been made by the permanent representative of the Republic of Congo on behalf of the African group of states members of the African Union. I am accompanied by Mauritians of Sagosian origin who were forcibly evicted from the Chagos archipelago and who are putting all their hopes in the United Nations to uphold their ability to return to the archipelago, which the complete decolonization of Mauritius will allow. Mr. President, I have been privileged to witness my country's political advancement and was one of those, now the only survivor, who participated in the Mauritius Constitutional Conference held in London in 1965 and which was meant to pave the way for the independence of Mauritius in 1968. I am therefore personally aware of the circumstances in which the Chagos archipelago was excised from the territory of Mauritius prior to independence. The Chagos archipelago has been part of the territory of Mauritius since at least the 18th century, at a time when Mauritius was a French colony. Throughout the period of French colonial rule, France governed the Chagos archipelago as one of the dependencies of Mauritius. All the islands forming part of Mauritius, including the Chagos archipelago, were ceded by France to the United Kingdom in 1810. The administration of the Chagos archipelago as a constituent part of Mauritius continued without interruption throughout the period of British colonial rule until its unlawful excision from the territory of Mauritius on the 8th November 1965. No one today can challenge that fact. Their excision was carried out in blatant violation of international law and UN General Assembly resolutions 1514 15 of 14th December 1960, containing the declaration on the granting of independence to colonial countries and peoples, which called for a speedy and unconditional end to colonialism. That declaration clearly stipulated that any attempt at the partial or total disruption of the national unity and the territorial integrity of a country is incompatible with the purposes and principles of the Charter of the United Nations. Further, the wrongfulness of the excision was recognized and confirmed in General Assembly Resolution 2066-20 of 16th December 1965, in which the General Assembly called upon the UK government to take effective measures with a view to the immediate and full implementation of Resolution 1514 and to take no action which would dismember the territory of Mauritius and violate its territorial integrity. Such views were reiterated in General Assembly Resolution 2232-21 of 20th December 1966 and Resolution 2257-22 of 19th December 1967. The decolonization process of Mauritius and the General Assembly's supervision thereof therefore remain incomplete. More than 30 years after the excision of the Chagos archipelago, shocking truth about the circumstances of the dismemberment of the territory of Mauritius came to light. For so many years, the United Nations and the world indeed were unaware of such facts, namely internal Foreign Office memos of 1965 and 1966 showing a deliberate intent to present the United Nations with a fait accompli and to mislead it about the permanent nature of the population who lived in the Chagos archipelago. The Chagosians were cynically referred to as Tarzans and Men Fridays. To avoid the scrutiny by the United Nations about the illegality of the dismemberment of the Mauritian territory and the eviction of the population living in the Chagos archipelago, it is today appropriate to recall what was stated back in 1965 by the UK Colonial Secretary to the UK Prime Minister. He said, and I quote, "It is essential that the arrangement for detachment of these islands should be completed as soon as possible. From the United Nations point of view, the timing is particularly awkward. We are already under attack over Aden and Rhodesia. We shall be accused of creating a new colony in a period of decolonization. If there were any chance of avoiding any publicity until this session of the General Assembly adjourns at Christmas, there would be advantage in delaying the order in Council until then. But to do so would jeopardize the whole plan. Moreover, we should lay ourselves open to an additional charge of dishonesty if we evaded the defense issue in the fourth committee and then made the order in Council immediately afterwards. It is therefore important that we should be able to present the UN with a fait accompli." End of quote. Delegations present here should find in these facts alone a compelling reason for the UN to be given today an opportunity to have a fresh look at the propriety of the acts done in 1965. The draft resolution is not a belated wake-up call from Mauritius, as suggested by some. It addresses colonialism and decolonization, a matter of interest to all members of the organization as a whole. Mauritius has never missed any opportunity as soon as its socio-economic circumstances permitted it to do so, and in light of those shocking truths, to voice its opposition in international fora, including the UN General Assembly. There has also been continued and sustained international condemnation of the dismemberment of Mauritius, of the illegal excision of the Chagos archipelago, or the continuing colonial legacy, including by the Organization of African Unity and subsequently the African Union, the Non-Aligned Movement, the Group of 77, and China, the African Caribbean Pacific Group of States, and the Africa-South America Summits. Mr. President, the dismemberment of the territory of Mauritius without the freely given consent of Mauritius in circumstances of patent and obvious duress, and the removal of the inhabitants of the Chagos archipelago with no possibility of return were acts constituting breaches of peremptory norms of international law, namely the violation of the principle of self-determination and the breach of fundamental principles of human rights. No amount of monetary compensation and no agreement to that effect can override these general principles of peremptory international law, not the least the right of self-determination. Mr. President, Mauritius, prior to its independence in 1968, had no legal competence as a state to give any consent to the detachment of the Chagos archipelago from its territory. It was a mere colony and had a colonial governor and lacked capacity to consent to detachment. it is obvious that it could not legally consent. Even if, as the UK's position seems to be, some form of consent was given in return for monetary compensation, the excision was incompatible with the provisions of the United Nations Charter as interpreted and applied by pertinent resolutions of the General Assembly. Consent, if any, of the colony of Mauritius could not validate breaches of the Charter. Moreover, Mauritius, as an independent sovereign state, has never entered into any agreement pertaining to such detachment. I need not say more. I hope I have persuaded you that arguments being put forward in support of a no vote and based upon such previous consent or financial compensation do not stand under international law. Mr. President, under your wise stewardship, the consideration of item 87 was deferred at the United Kingdom's request until June 2017 in order to allow Mauritius and the United Kingdom to engage in talks aimed at the completion of the decolonization process of Mauritius. 3 rounds of talks have been held between Mauritius and the United Kingdom. However, these talks became pointless as the United Kingdom was unwilling to discuss a date certain for the completion of the decolonization of Mauritius. It was unwilling even to talk about decolonization. The position that the administering power brought about in 1965 remains unchanged today. Consequently, as there is no prospect of any end to the colonization of Mauritius, the General Assembly has a continuing responsibility to act. More than 5 decades have passed, and now is the time to act. It is fitting for the General Assembly to fulfill that function on the basis of guidance from the International Court of Justice as to the legality of the excision of the Chagos Archipelago in 1965. The draft resolution before the General Assembly contains 2 legal questions which are linked to the issue of decolonization. A matter of direct interest to the General Assembly, an advisory opinion will no doubt contribute significantly to the work of the General Assembly in fulfilling its functions under chapters 11 to 13 of the United Nations Charter. Different views of one or more states on the legality of the excision of the Chagos Archipelago in 1965 do not make of the excision a mere bilateral matter. The International Court of Justice has made this absolutely clear, including in recent opinions on Kosovo and on the war. Rather, this matter concerns a need for guidance from the International Court for the General Assembly on an important matter of decolonization. Bilateral talks seeking to address this matter simply are not a basis for denying the multilateral interest in the matter. Member states of the United Nations have the collective responsibility to uphold the principles enshrined in the UN Charter, the Declaration on the Granting of Independence to Colonial Countries and Peoples, and all relevant resolutions. In doing so, we shall be upholding the integrity and authority of institutions which we have created, in particular the General Assembly, and the General Assembly's continued responsibility in completing the decolonization process, which started in the 1950s, should not be thwarted by arguments not in line with international law. Some of our friends are arguing a vote against the draft resolution for reasons that are not valid. These reasons are not for the General Assembly to decide, and they can in any event be raised, if they wish, in proceedings before the International Court of Justice in due course. Besides breaches of principles of international law and General Assembly resolutions remain breaches that can never validly be acquiesced in or consented or traded off with money. These breaches and the issues of colonization and decolonization are of interest to the whole international community. They cannot ever be waved away as merely bilateral, as the administering power would want member states to believe. Likewise, our friends have invoked security concerns, which they claim may be endangered. Let me make it clear that there is no threat to peace and security by seeking an advisory opinion. Simply asking these questions to the court does not prohibit specific states from continuing to hold different views on the answer to the questions. Mauritius is also very much concerned about security in the world, and that is why we have repeatedly said that we do not have any problem with the military base, but that our decolonization process should be completed. We want to assure the United Kingdom and the United States of America that the exercise of effective control by Mauritius over the Sagos archipelago would not in any way pose any threat to the military base. Mauritius is committed to the continued operation of the base in Diego Garcia under a long-term framework which Mauritius stands ready to enter into with the concerned parties. The vote on the draft resolution before the General Assembly would be a vote in support of completing the process of decolonization, respect for international law and the rule of law, and respect for the international institutions which we member states of the United Nations have created. It is also a vote of confidence in the ICJ, the principal judicial organ of the United Nations. My delegation, therefore, urges you, through your vote for the draft resolution, to send a signal that your delegation, and indeed your state, supports international law and the rule of law. Mr. President, let me now briefly recapitulate the salient points of our position. 1. The Sagos Archipelago has always formed and continues to form an integral part of the territory of Mauritius. 2. The displaced inhabitants of the Sagos Archipelago had lived there for many generations. 3. The issue of dismemberment of Mauritius has repeatedly been invoked at the annual meetings of the General Assembly and in other UN bodies, as well as in other international fora, such as the OAU, AU, NAM, and G77. 4th, the UK has refused to address decolonization during recent talks. Fifth, UK proposals during the talks were manifestly inadequate, failing to address the completion of the decolonization of Mauritius. Sixth, the subject of the request for an advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice does not relate to a bilateral dispute. Seventh, the mere request for an advisory opinion does not have any bearing on or adversely affect the security interests of any other state. Eighth, it is for the International Court of Justice to address outstanding questions as to the basis for the request for an advisory opinion. Ninth, a yes vote on the draft resolution will uphold the institutions of the UN, assist the General Assembly, and support the principles of the UN Charter and the international rule of law. Just like item 87 was included by consensus on the agenda of the General Assembly, we would hope that the draft resolution can be adopted in the same manner. Let us allow the United Nations to fulfill its mandate as regards decolonization. I was in London in 1965. 52 years later, I invite all members to join in signaling that now is the time for the right of self-determination to be recognized and for the rule of law to prevail. I believe that it is the collective responsibility of all of us as members of the United Nations to support this draft resolution. Thank you, Mr. President.
And I thank the distinguished representative of Mauritius for his statement. And I now give the floor to the distinguished permanent representative of Venezuela, who will speak on behalf of the non-aligned movement.
Señor Presidente,
Mr. President, I have the honor of taking the floor on behalf of the movement of non-aligned countries. First of all, allow me to express our gratitude for convening this plenary session, which is devoted specifically to the consideration of the draft resolution A/71/L73, entitled Request for an Advisory Opinion of the International Court of Justice on the Legal Consequences of the Separation of the Chagos Archipelago from Mauritius in 1965, which was submitted by the Republic of Congo on behalf of the African Group. Mr. President, the founding principles of the movement of non-aligned countries are rooted in its rejection of colonialism. The fight for liberation was the main factor which brought together the new independent states of Africa, Asia, and Asia-Pacific and Latin America. The support of the non-aligned movement for decolonization initiatives has remained and continues to be unwavering. As we draw closer to the end of the third decade for the eradication of colonization, the need to free peoples from the shackles of colonialism has become even more pressing and critical. In this respect, I would like to recall the position which was agreed to by the heads of state or government during the 17th summit of the Movement of Non-Aligned Countries held in Margarita Island, Venezuela, on the 17th and 18th of September 2016. The heads of state and government reaffirmed that the Chagos Archipelago, including Diego Garcia Island, which was illegally removed from the territory of Mauritius by the former colonial power, in breach of international law as well as the UN resolutions 1514, Roman 15, of the 14th of December 1960, and 2066, Roman 20, of the 16th of December 1965, are an integral part of the territory of the Republic of Mauritius. The heads of state and government observed with great concern that despite the strong opposition expressed by the Republic of Mauritius, the United Kingdom intended to establish a marine protected area around the Chagos Archipelago, thus violating even further the exercise of sovereignty of the Republic of Mauritius over the Chagos Archipelago, as well as the exercise of the right of return for the Mauritian citizens who were forcibly removed from the archipelago by the United Kingdom. In this respect, they welcomed the verdict of the arbitration tribunal in the case presented by the Republic of Mauritius against the United Kingdom under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, and according to which the marine protected area was established illegally in accordance with international law. The heads of state and government noted that on the 18th of March 2017, following the proceedings begun by Mauritius against the United Kingdom under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea to challenge the legality of the marine protected area, the arbitration tribunal established in accordance with Annex 7 of the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea, and they ruled unanimously that the MPA violated international law. Mindful of the fact that the government of the Republic of Mauritius is committed to take all the necessary measures to affirm the territorial integrity of the Republic of Mauritius and its sovereignty over the Chagos Archipelago under international law, the heads of state and government decided to fully support these measures, including any action which could be undertaken in this direction in the UN General Assembly. Mr. President, the movement of non-aligned countries, in line with the positions adopted by the heads of state and government during the 17th summit of Margarita Island, appeals to all of the member states of the movement to support the action begun by the African group under Agenda Item 87 of the UN General Assembly. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished permanent representative of Venezuela speaking on behalf of the non-aligned movement, and I now give the floor to the distinguished permanent representative of Angola, who will speak on behalf of the Southern African Development Community.
Mr. President, distinguished delegates, I have the honor to speak on behalf of the 15 United Nations member states who are members of the Southern African Development Community, SADC, namely Angola, Botswana, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Lesotho, Madagascar, Malawi, Mauritius, Mozambique, Namibia, Seychelles, South Africa, Swaziland, Tanzania, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. This statement is being delivered in connection with Item 87 entitled Request for an Advisory Opinion of the International Court of Justice on the legal consequences of the separation of the Chagos Archipelago from Mauritius in 1965, unquote, and under which a draft resolution bearing reference A/71/L.73 has been tabled by the African Group this morning. We also wish to align ourselves with the statements delivered just now by the distinguished ambassadors of Congo and Venezuela on behalf of the African groups and the states members of the non-aligned movement, respectively. Mr. President, the precursor organization of the Southern African Development Community, namely the Frontline States, was formed in 1976 with the objective of assisting the Southern African countries to achieve independence both politically and economically. Although SADC has emerged today as among one of the strongest regional economic blocs on the African continent, we have not foregone the primary objective for which this organization was established. As a region, SADC member states have experienced colonialism in different forms and had lived through periods of minority governments which had catered to external interests rather than to the needs of the local people. In spite of all odds, challenges and pressures,